Okay, part 2 of this chapter deals with the different cultures that are represented in the United States. So we will look at children's literature from all of these different cultures in class in session 4. The first subgroup of American culture is the Asian and Pacific Americans, and this includes all kinds of different groups: Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Korean, Hmong, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian, Thais, Malaysians, East Indians, and Pakistanis. And so we need to remember when we're talking about Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders that we need to remember that includes a lot of different cultures. So the first Asian immigrants to the United States were from the Chinese. They came to the gold rush in 1848. You can see a lot of different pictures from that time period do include Asian people from China. Then next were the Japanese, and they came to Hawaii, and there's a rich history of Japan and Hawaii. They came in 1868, and then during World War II they were actually removed to internment camps, which I have a couple of books about that, and that's a very interesting part of American history that would be very interesting to look into if you want to do that. Then Filipino and Korean Americans followed in the early 1900s. And then Vietnamese entered after the Vietnam War in 1975. And you will see a lot of different small communities of Vietnamese individuals around the Oklahoma area, the Missouri area in some parts. A lot of their unifying characteristics include they're very hardworking, their elders are valued, as you will see in the picture on this page, and then they are considered the most highly educated of the immigrants. And so they're a very hardworking, contribute to our society group of individuals. The next culture we'll talk about is the Mexican culture, and even though this is, our book labels it as Mexican, you can think of it as Hispanic culture as well. They highly value closeness and loyalty to family, and if you ever heard the term collectivism, that is where the people think of themselves more as a group, not as individuals, and they strive for success as a group. And so that's very important when you're talking about having these children from the Hispanic culture in your classroom, because a lot of American culture values competition, and that is not true in the Hispanic culture. They have godparents for religious ceremonies. This tends to be a very religious group of people. Catholicism is their main religion. They have close and personal relationships with family and the teacher. They tend to actually consider the teacher a part of their family during the school year. And so a lack of respect for parents in the culture is considered sinful. And so you will see a lot of these people, they have a lot of respect for their parents and people in places of authority. And so sometimes it's hard for students from a Hispanic culture to ask a question of a teacher or challenge anything or question a teacher. And so in order to have conversations in your classroom, you might actually have to draw those students out. Gender roles are often very defined, and this might not be as prevalent as it was 50 years ago, but they still are defined and adhered to. I already talked about achievement for the family, not the individual. It's a collective effort. And so another thing that you will need to know as a teacher of these students is that their schoolwork is not as important as their home responsibilities, because they do value their family so much. And so you might have students that do not complete their homework, or don't feel like, the family doesn't feel like they should spend 2 hours at night doing homework, which would be too much for younger students anyway. And so their homework might not be done, but they might have spent time together as a family. So you need to know that about this culture so you can make adjustments for them. The next culture we'll talk about is the Middle Eastern culture, and this one is newer in the United States, but it's also a growing population. But as everyone knows, 9/11 and then the wars that followed in Iraq and Afghanistan have given Americans an overall negative view of the Middle Eastern cultures, probably because we don't understand them, and it's hard for us to even get to know a lot about them because there's a lot of negativity and secretive things that we don't really understand. And so, but if you have students in your class that are from this culture, you really need to make an effort to get to know their family traditions and values and things of that sort, so you'll know how to help their student the best that you can. Religion is very, very important, and most Muslims are very religious, so you need to remember that. Some children from this culture do not attend school, and so it's very difficult as a teacher to know what to do sometimes in these situations. But sometimes your fellow teachers in a community that has children from these cultures are your best bet to go and talk with them and really know how to address these issues. So, because you have all these cultures that are integrated into the American society, we need to remember that we will have a lot of English language learners. So these are children who English is not their first language, and so they will have difficulty not only communicating but also sometimes understanding. So their expressive language will fall behind other students, but sometimes their receptive language will as well. So the authors of our textbooks say that it takes children more than 5 years for them to become proficient, depending on the age. So if children are very young when they come to the United States, they will learn English quickly. So if they're 2 or 3, they will learn it very quickly. But the older they are, the harder it is to learn a new language. So 5 years. So it takes a long time. So don't expect students to know right away how to communicate and how to be successful. You have to help them. But one of the problems is that teachers really have very minimal specialized training for helping English language learners. Sometimes you can take workshops to help. There are whole courses on how to teach ELLs. So it's kind of your decision on how you approach that. Sometimes if you have a large population of a certain culture in a school district, your administration will be in charge of specialized training or whatever. But some of the factors that influence student success in your classroom would be their past life experiences, their family educational experience. If family values education highly, then they're going to be more likely to do whatever they need to do to help their student. Their self-image, their learning style, their multiple intelligences. Also, other things that influence their success will have to do with your classroom management. How strict or how relaxed or how similar it is to their home life. If there is a definition of teacher and student roles, your body language, your facial expressions, sometimes those nonverbal cues that you give are different based on the different culture, so they're interpreted differently. So just be aware of those things. So you hear the terminology bilingual, English language learner. What are really the differences in those? Well, if you hear the word bilingual, it will be a situation where students are taught in English and in their native language. So you will have a teacher in a classroom that teaches in English, but they also are proficient in another language. Most of the time it's Spanish, and they will actually teach in both of those languages throughout the day. If you hear ELL teaching, then it will be more than likely students spend part of their day in a separate ELL classroom and then part of the day mainstreamed into general education classroom, and so they will actually leave. And there is really a disagreement about which one of these arrangements is the most profitable for students. But usually graduating from an ELL classroom requires passing some type of English proficiency test. So if you're in a school district that does that, you'll need to know about that, and your administration will help you with that. So to help students who are not native English speakers in your classroom, You need to really have your environment rich in language experience, especially um, really for all ages. But you need to label your room, especially for younger students. Put them in English and Spanish, or in English and whatever their native language is. Help kids by journaling. They can draw, they can write what they can, and they can read it back to you. But lots of times, writing things or drawing things will help them express themselves. Also, having really rich units with interdisciplinary instruction. It exposes kids to lots of different things, lots of different words, which vocabulary is a really hard thing for ELL sometimes to grasp, but a lot of different interactions with words and people, and learning. It needs to be in context. Don't do a lot of isolated like word calling, but lots of things in context. Bring in books like this one you see with Eric Carle. It's The Very Hungry Caterpillar. It's in Spanish, and there are a lot of books that are published in both English and Spanish, or English in another language. And so just really immerse them in a lot of language and drawing and literacy, and get a lot of different learning styles in there to help them learn. So a lot of the difficulty in social studies has to do with prior knowledge, because if students are not from America, then they will have a lot of difficulty knowing about the history, and the things that you learn about in social studies a lot of times has to do with history, or where a certain group of people came from, or who originated in a certain location, or who was the explorer in a certain area. And so you need to really remember that, and sometimes you need to use less language dependent ways of responding. So like in these pictures you see over to the side, these students have created villages. You know, the one at the bottom is the Native American with the teepees, and this one is Pueblo Indians, I believe. So have kids make lots of hands-on things, artifacts, pictures, visuals. Show them movies, show them demonstrations, have them create visual responses to the things that they are learning, and it will help them to be able to show you what they do know and what they understand. Another way that you can make social studies come alive for students is to connect them to other classrooms through technology. And I want you to go and look at a lot of these, but there are just so many rich things to do on the internet that kids can connect with other kids in other cultures. ePals, you can do projects together, you can write emails to each other. Skype in the classroom, there's such a huge amount of information and resources available for Skype. Google Lit Trips, Google Treks. I just want you to get on here and really look through some of those, and we'll talk about several of them in class. So if you think about a practical application of multicultural education, I want you to think of a unit you're doing on Thanksgiving, and think about all of the prior knowledge that students need to know in order to learn about this. And if they don't have that, they're going to feel lost. And so what might you do to include your ELL students and help them feel successful? So I want you to think about, and we'll talk about this in class, but think about specific ways that they can respond that are less language dependent and more visual or kinesthetic movement and those type of things. And then we'll talk about this in class too, but I want you to be ready and thinking about what is the most important aspect of multicultural education. Actually, this is part of your blog as well, so you'll have to be thinking about this. What's the most difficult aspect? What do you think that you'll take from this chapter and actually use in your classroom? So be ready with the things that you're supposed to write on your blog, and be ready to discuss those in class.